The crystal clink of a champagne glass echoed through the dining room, just before my daughter-in-law's voice rose above the chatter. "Here's to Margaret," Sarah said, flashing her practiced smile. "Always hungry for attention. And for free food." Laughter burst around the table like a cue in a sitcom. I didn't laugh. Instead, I reached calmly into my purse, pulled out one of my sleek, silver-embossed business cards, and slid it across the table toward her manicured hand. "Actually, Sarah," I said, my tone light but cutting, "I'm hungry for a new head of sales." "You're fired." The laughter died instantly. "If you're watching this and wondering how we got here, let me start from the beginning. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I'm 73 years old, and until 3 hours ago, most people thought I was a lonely widow, living quietly off my husband's pension and Social Security checks. What they didn't know was that I owned 67% of the company my ambitious daughter-in-law thought she was running. It all started 5 years ago when my son, David, brought Sarah home for the first time. She was fresh out of business school, sharp, stylish, and ambitious enough to power a small city. "Mom, you'll love Sarah," David told me over coffee that first week. "She's brilliant. She just became the top salesperson at her firm." When Sarah walked into my modest suburban house that weekend, she scanned the place like she was appraising real estate. Her designer suit didn't belong in my kitchen, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "What a cute little neighborhood," she said, scrolling through her phone mid-sentence. When David mentioned that I volunteered at the local community center, she tilted her head with a syrupy grin. "That's sweet," she said. "Everyone needs hobbies." I smiled too. I didn't bother telling her that I'd been running a consulting empire for 4 decades. A firm that had guided over 200 businesses through expansions, mergers, and crises. The company was small but powerful, discreet but profitable, and I preferred it that way. 2 years later, when David and Sarah announced their engagement, she insisted the wedding be held at the country club. "David deserves the best," she said, as if I might object. I wrote the check without hesitation. My son's happiness meant more than my ego. But the cracks began to show soon after the honeymoon. Sarah had opinions about everything: my furniture, my wardrobe, even my car. At one Thanksgiving dinner, she laughed and said, "Maybe it's time to get a smartphone, Margaret. You'd finally join the modern world." David chuckled nervously and changed the subject. But I caught the smirk she tried to hide behind her wine glass. I bit my tongue. She saw me as an aging relic, and I let her believe it. Because sometimes, the easiest way to win a game is to let the other player think you're not even playing. 2 years into their marriage, Sarah landed what she called her dream job: head of sales at Preston & Chorus Consulting. Every dinner turned into a performance about her achievements: new accounts, record bonuses, praise from the board. "I'm going to turn that company around," she declared one evening, cutting into her steak with theatrical precision. "Their sales team is outdated. I'll probably be running the place in 5 years." That was the first time I felt something stir. Not jealousy, but curiosity. Because Preston & Co. wasn't just any consulting firm. It was my biggest competitor. And my daughter-in-law had just declared war, without realizing she was stepping onto my battlefield. Sarah's new position at Preston & Co. quickly became her favorite subject, and everyone else's nightmare. Each family dinner turned into her personal press conference. "The Henderson deal," she'd say proudly. "Closed it last week. Biggest sale in company history. They said it couldn't be done, but I proved them wrong." David looked at her with pure admiration, like she'd hung the moon herself. "Tell Mom about the bonus," he said, eager for me to be impressed. Sarah sipped her wine, savoring the moment. $50,000 in cash plus a company car and profit sharing. She smiled across the table, waiting for me to blink first. "That's wonderful, dear," I said evenly, refilling my glass of water. "Competition keeps everyone sharp." Her smile faltered for just a moment. She'd expected me to gasp or gush, not offer polite indifference. But she recovered quickly and changed the topic back to her victories. What Sarah didn't realize was that I knew the Henderson account very well, too well. My firm had been cultivating that client for 3 years. My team had built the foundation of that relationship. The data, the strategy, the trust. Then Preston swooped in with an aggressive bid and stole it. At least that's how it looked on the surface. Inside, I began to notice a pattern. Each time Sarah bragged about another victory it involved. A client my firm had once approached, and somehow Preston always seemed to know exactly what to offer. pricing details, project timelines, internal notes, information no outsider could possibly access. It didn't make sense, unless someone was feeding them intel. "Mom," David said one evening as we cleared the dishes, "you should really ask Sarah for business advice. She's amazing at this stuff." Sarah laughed softly, her tone dripping with condescension. "Oh, David, your mom's community projects are adorable. But I deal with million-dollar accounts. It's a whole different league." I smiled. "Of course, dear. Different leagues, indeed." That night, I called Marcus Whitmore, my longtime attorney, a sharp man with a mind like a scalpel. "Marcus," I said, "I need you to do some digging. Preston & Co. has been landing a few too many of our potential clients. I want to know how." 2 weeks later, his report arrived. It confirmed what my instincts had already whispered. Preston had been receiving insider information about my operations, pricing structures, client needs, even early proposal drafts. But there was one detail Sarah couldn't possibly know. Those particular clients weren't meant to be long-term. I'd marked them as high-maintenance, low-profit accounts, decoys, essentially. While Preston celebrated their supposed wins, they were actually drowning in the very accounts I'd intentionally avoided. Ironically, Sarah's genius strategy was doing my work for me. She was cleaning up my client list without even realizing it. Still, something about her arrogance gnawed at me. She didn't just want to succeed. She wanted to see me small. And that kind of ambition, left unchecked, eventually turns dangerous. The invitation to David and Sarah's 5th anniversary gala arrived soon after, heavy gold lettering on ivory cardstock. "An evening of celebration," it read. "Cocktails, dinner, and dancing at the Riverside Country Club." I had a feeling it wasn't just about love. With Sarah, nothing ever was. At the dinner, she sparkled in a black cocktail dress that screamed wealth and power. Her laughter filled the room like champagne bubbles, light and artificial. "Margaret," she said when she spotted me. "So glad you could make it. You remember the Hendersons, don't you?" Of course I remembered. The man shook my hand awkwardly. "Mrs. Whitmore, I hope there are no hard feelings about that contract. You know how business goes." "Of course," I said smoothly. "I hope Preston is living up to all your expectations." His expression tightened. "Well, there've been some challenges." Sarah's laugh came too quickly. "Oh, Jim's just being dramatic." "Everything's fine." But I could see the truth in his eyes. Preston's golden deals were beginning to crumble. That night, I left the party early, my suspicions confirmed. Sarah wasn't building a legacy. She was building a house of cards, and I had every intention of being there when it fell. The morning after the party, I sat at my kitchen table with a pot of coffee and a legal pad, connecting dots that no one else could see. Sarah's clients were collapsing. Preston's wins were turning toxic. And if I knew her type, and I did, she'd soon start looking for someone else to blame. 3 days later, my phone rang. Marcus's tone was clipped, too professional for small talk. "Margaret," he said, "we need to meet. This isn't something to discuss over the phone." 2 hours later, I was seated in his office, the air smelling faintly of leather and paper. He spread out a stack of documents across his mahogany desk like a magician revealing his final trick. "Someone's trying to acquire your company," he said, "and they know far too much about it." I frowned. "Acquire Whitmore Consulting? That's absurd." Marcus pushed a letter across the desk. "This came yesterday, a formal offer from Preston & Co. They're calling it a fair market purchase." The number was laughable, barely a fraction of what the firm was worth. "This is an insult," I said flatly. "That's not the problem," Marcus replied. "The letter came with a detailed analysis of your business, client lists, contracts, even your expense reports. It's information they shouldn't have." A chill ran through me. "So they've been inside my walls." He nodded grimly. "Someone close to you is feeding them data." For the first time in years, I felt my hand tremble slightly as I lifted my cup. "Do you think it's one of my staff?" "It's possible," Marcus said carefully. "But the files they've accessed are limited to top-level directories. Someone would need passwords or intimate knowledge of your systems." I leaned back, the pieces locking into place with terrifying precision. The dinners, the probing questions, the casual curiosity disguised as family conversation. Sarah, she had always been eager to discuss my little consulting projects, often steering talk toward my clients, who they were, what industries they belonged to, what challenges they faced. I'd brushed it off as harmless interest. Now I knew better. "Marcus," I said quietly, Look for any financial connection between Preston and someone in my family. His brows rose slightly, but he didn't question it. You'll have an answer by Friday. The days that followed felt endless. I went through my usual motions: client calls, project reviews, strategy meetings, but every word I spoke felt like an act. Beneath the calm exterior, I was counting seconds. Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed. Marcus's voice was low, deliberate. "Margaret, you'd better come in." The folder waiting for me this time was thicker, heavier, like it carried the weight of betrayal itself. Inside were bank statements showing regular transfers from Preston and Co. to Sarah Whitmore, listed as a consultant. Payments dating back 8 months, coinciding exactly with Preston's suspicious wins. "She's been feeding them your data," Marcus said. "Legally, it's framed as an advisory arrangement. Ethically, it's industrial espionage." For a moment, I said nothing. I simply stared at the neat columns of numbers. The cold, hard evidence of trust turned to poison. I'd opened my home to her, shared dinners, holidays, family memories. And all that time, she'd been sharpening a knife behind my back. But grief was a luxury I couldn't afford, not when strategy was still on my side. I closed the folder, my voice calm again. "Marcus, I'll need some paperwork prepared." "What kind of paperwork?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "The kind that closes chapters." He nodded. "Do you want to press charges?" "Not yet," I said. "First, I want her to know who she's been stealing from." That weekend, I sat alone in my study, the city lights flickering through the blinds. On my desk lay 2 things, Marcus's folder and an embossed envelope with David and Sarah's address. Family dinner was tomorrow night, and it was time for a new kind of toast. Sunday evening arrived cloaked in calm, but my heart beat with the precision of a ticking clock. The air outside was cool, crisp, the kind that carries change on its breath. As I drove through the tree-lined streets of David and Sarah's upscale neighborhood, I rehearsed nothing. I didn't need to. Everything I intended to say was already etched into memory. Sarah's house gleamed with quiet arrogance. Warm light spilled through wide bay windows. Laughter floated faintly from inside, and a BMW I'd helped David finance sat neatly in the driveway. I parked behind it, grabbed my purse, and checked that the manila envelope was still tucked safely inside. David opened the door with his usual warmth. "Mom, perfect timing. Sarah's just pouring the wine you love." Sarah appeared behind him, flawless as always. Her smile was wide, her confidence radiant. "Margaret, you look wonderful. Come in, we were just talking about you." If only she knew. Dinner, as usual, was an exhibition of success. Polished silverware, candles reflected in crystal glasses, food plated like a magazine spread. Sarah thrived on control, and tonight she believed she had it. Halfway through the meal, she set down her glass and said, "We actually have some exciting news." David smiled proudly, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. "Preston and Co. is expanding," Sarah continued, her tone glowing with pride. "They're opening a new acquisitions division, and they've asked me to head it. 200,000 base salary plus bonuses." I raised an eyebrow. Impressive. "What sort of acquisitions are you targeting?" Her eyes sparkled with a secret she couldn't wait to share. "Well," she said, leaning forward, "I probably shouldn't say too much, but there's a small consulting firm we're looking at. The owner's getting old and the business has good bones. With the right direction, it could be worth a fortune." "Fascinating," I murmured, setting down my fork. "Would I know the firm?" Sarah's lips curved into a satisfied grin. "Whitmore Consulting." For a moment, silence filled the room like static. David blinked, confusion flickering across his face. "Wait, Mom, isn't that—" "Yes," I interrupted softly, reaching into my purse. "That's my company." Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. "What?" I pulled out the first document, a corporate ownership record, stamped and notarized. I slid it across the table like a winning card in a poker game. 3 years ago, when Preston was struggling financially, I quietly purchased a controlling interest. 67% to be exact. I own Preston and Co. Sarah, every client, every deal, every dollar you've been bragging about, all of it has been under my umbrella. Her face went pale. "That's not possible. You volunteer at a community center." I smiled. "Yes, on Thursdays. On the other 6 days, I run a multi-million-dollar consulting network." David stared between us, his expression torn between disbelief and dawning horror. "Mom, you never said anything." "It wasn't relevant," I said evenly. "Until now." I opened the envelope and withdrew the second document. Marcus's report, the one detailing the bank transfers. You've been receiving payments from Preston for the past 8 months, I said, my tone calm but sharp. For consulting services, which in reality were confidential data leaks from my company. Sarah's voice cracked. That's a lie. You can't prove I cut her off. Every transfer is here, Sarah. Every timestamp. Every account. I don't need to prove it to you. The law will handle that. David pushed back from the table, his face ghost white. Sarah, tell me this isn't true. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The empire she'd built on deceit was collapsing faster than she could breathe. I stood, collected the documents, and placed my business card. The same kind she'd mocked at that dinner years ago, on her plate. You wanted to run Preston Industries, I said softly. Congratulations. You just resigned from it. For the first time since I'd known her, Sarah had no comeback, only the hollow sound of silence as her world cracked open. David, I said gently, I'll be leaving now. But I suggest you and Sarah have an honest conversation about what comes next. I turned toward the door, the air thick behind me. Before I left, I glanced back once. Sarah sat frozen, her once perfect posture bent under the weight of her own ambition. And for the first time in 5 years, I felt the balance restored. By the time I stepped outside, the night air felt cleaner, as if the world itself had been holding its breath until that moment. The quiet hum of the city lights flickered in the distance. But I wasn't looking back. For years, Sarah had treated me like a relic, a harmless, outdated mother-in-law clinging to fading relevance. But that illusion was gone now, burned away by truth. I had spent decades building something out of nothing. And tonight, I took it back. The next morning, the world moved faster than gossip ever could. At 9 a.m., my legal team filed the paperwork removing Sarah Thompson from her position at Preston & Co., effective immediately. The memo went out to all staff by noon. As part of a restructuring initiative under new ownership, several executive changes will be made. We thank Mrs. Thompson for her service and wish her well in her future endeavors. By 12:30, Sarah's company access was revoked. Her office keycard flashed red when she tried to enter. By 2:00, the news reached David, who called me 3 times in a row. I didn't answer. Some truths need silence to echo. Later that week, I invited him over. He arrived alone, tired, eyes shadowed. He looked like a man who had aged years in a few days. She's gone to stay with her sister, he said quietly, sinking into the armchair across from me. She still swears she didn't mean to hurt anyone. She just wanted to prove herself. I know, I replied softly. But ambition without integrity always eats itself. He nodded, staring at his hands. Mom, why didn't you tell me? About Preston. About everything? I smiled faintly. Because I wanted you to live your life without my shadow. But I also wanted you to see that power doesn't shout, David. It waits. It moves quietly until the time is right. He swallowed hard. You've always been 10 steps ahead. No, I said gently. I've just lived long enough to know when not to underestimate someone, especially myself. We sat in silence for a while. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, wind rustled the maple leaves that lined the driveway. Then David spoke again, his voice small but sincere. What happens now? I reached across the table and placed a single sheet of paper before him, a transfer of partial ownership. You take this. 15%. You'll help run the company properly this time, with humility. His eyes widened. You're giving me... I'm sharing, I interrupted. Not everything, but enough to teach you how to build, not just inherit. Tears welled in his eyes. I don't deserve this. I smiled. Neither did Sarah, but you can earn it. For the first time in years, my son looked at me not as a frail mother to be managed, but as the woman who built an empire from grit and silence. The following month, Preston & Co. rebranded as Whitmore Industries launched a new initiative supporting women entrepreneurs over 50. I stood on stage, surrounded by younger executives, my gray hair catching the studio lights. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but I just smiled. When one journalist asked, Mrs. Whitmore, how does it feel to reclaim your legacy after so long? I simply said, they took my home and called it theirs. But I came back as the true owner of everything. The crowd erupted in applause. But I barely heard them, because in that moment I wasn't thinking about revenge, or pride, or even victory. I was thinking about peace, the kind that comes when you stop waiting for validation and start standing in your own truth. Sarah faded quietly from the headlines. Rumor had it she moved to another state, started over. Perhaps she learned something, perhaps not. It didn't matter. David grew stronger, wiser, and eventually, proud to bear the Whitmore name not as a privilege, but as a responsibility. And as for me, I didn't rebuild to prove I could. I rebuilt because I never stopped being who I was. A woman who built, lost, and rose again. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in absolute ownership of her story.